Runner's knee is knee pain from running. Okay, that part is obvious. So today, we're actually going to be looking at the mechanics behind knee pain, what brings it on, and of course the most important part, how to prevent it from happening in the first place. But first, we need to meet Barry. Well, let me introduce my glamorous assistant, Barry. Now, Barry's not going to be contributing that much, but he will be providing us with his knee later on. But before we do crack on with the video, just a quick reminder to click on that bell icon and the globe so you make sure you're subscribed and you'll be notified every time we have a new video out on GTN. Well, to the point, what is runner's knee? Well, as the name suggests, it is a pain that often comes on from running in the knee area, usually towards the front of the knee. And with that in mind, it's often also called anterior knee pain, which if you see written down and abbreviated, it's AKP. Well, it often presents with some visible swelling, and it'll have that feeling of the joint when it is a little bit swollen. By that I mean if you try to bend it or put it into a tight action, it just feels tight as though you're compressing it. So I personally notice if I've got a bit of anterior knee pain that it'll be worse when I'm walking downstairs or I'm trying to squat or maybe sit cross-legged, anything that's just putting your knee into that position. And it's something that can come on fairly quickly, but on the plus side, when it's treated correctly and with rest, it can also ease and disappear quite quickly. Well, to give you a little bit of an idea of what the knee looks like and where the pain is, I am going to bring in Barry for this. Now, Barry is fairly basic. However, he does have all of the bones. Even if we don't have any ligaments or tendons, we've got all the bones involved in the knee joint here. So the deep joint is a hinge joint between the femur and the tibia. That is officially the knee joint. And on the outside, you've got the fibular bone, but I'm going to brush over these as anterior knee pain is most commonly a result of this bone not moving correctly, the patella. In this case, it looks like it's sort of floating, but of course it's not in real life. Now, all of our joints are held together by ligaments, tendons, fascia, muscles, and the patella bone, aka the kneecap, is no different. This is a rather mobile joint. It's called the patella femoral joint. So you've got the patella and the femur. It's held in place by the quadricep tendon at the top and then the patella tendon beneath it. And to give you an idea of how mobile it is, I'm sure you guys at some point have sat with your legs out straight and just sort of fiddled with your kneecap, and you'll notice just how much it can move laterally side to side and even up and down to a certain extent, which is great until it stops tracking correctly, and it needs to track in a fairly smooth and fairly narrow plane. So you can see there's a bit of a groove in the femur here, and it has to sit in that groove, because as soon as you've got the muscles surrounding it that are either overworking or just getting a little bit fatigued and not working or not switching on enough, can start to pull it off track. And then if you imagine how many steps you do a day or how many steps you do when you're out running, if that tracking's ever so slightly off place, it's going to start to cause you issues. Well, now you understand, hopefully, a little bit more about runner's knee and sort of what's going on physiologically. The clinical term might make a little bit more sense. So it's patellofemoral pain, like we explained, kind of just saying what's happening here. But I don't think we need to go into any more detail. It's time to look at why we get it and, more importantly, what to do when we actually experience this runner's knee pain. So for that, I'm going to head back outside. Your patella is put under tension every time you bend your knee, but don't worry, it is designed to do that. But if that movement is ever so slightly misaligned, well, it will start to aggravate it, and this will cause inflammation, which then causes your pain receptors to fire and say, oh, your knee hurts. If you add running into the mix, well, not only are you going to be bending your knee more often, you're also going to be adding the pressure, because every time the quadriceps contract, your big muscles at the front of your leg, they're going to add the pressure to that joint. And it's a common misconception that the repetitive motion of running alone causes this knee pain, but it's more likely that running actually highlights areas of weakness and tightness, which then manifest as poor joint tracking. And if you take away this increased force on the patellofemoral joint, so in other words, stop running, you'll find that the inflammation reduces and the pain usually disperses within a few days up to a week. And you can actually speed up this process by resting and maybe even doing some icing on the area. And in severe cases, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories will also help speed it up. Well, getting rid of the pain is one thing, but none of us really want to stop running. So what happens when we return to running? Well, unless we've actually addressed the cause of these symptoms, the symptoms are simply going to return. Now, there are several reasons for injuries, as with any injury, but with anterior knee pain, there are a few more common ones. For example, if you're running and your foot is turning ever so slightly out or in, that's going to cause your kneecap to potentially slightly misalign and bring on that knee pain. Well, this can happen if your legs and your core are not quite strong enough. So for that, you need to look further up the chain. Your glutes hold your hips level, and in the run gait, they have to work even harder. Each stride, you are in effect doing a single leg mini squat. And if you drop your hip on landing, this will cause your knee to move inwards. Now, running is known for making muscles tight, and if you're naturally a stiff person and then add running into the mix, you're open to issues. In particular, the quadriceps and hip flexors. Being tight in this area can put even more pressure on the patellofemoral joint and result in knee pain. A lot of downhill running, if you're not conditioned, will again be adding to the pressure on that joint. Another couple of potential contributing factors, which are actually true for most running injuries, are increasing your running too quickly and your running shoes themselves. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here because this is something we've talked about plenty of times on the channel, but if you do up the rate of your running too fast, well, your body's not going to have enough time to adapt and get strong, and this is going to manifest in those earlier issues that we talked about, such as having muscles that are too weak or too tight, or quite likely a combination of both. Your running shoes could also be contributing. Check that they are not too worn and are giving your foot the support that it needs. I mentioned earlier that the causes can be poor movement at the hip, but below the knee, as in the foot and ankle, can also be bringing on the issue. For example, if your foot excessively falls inwards, aka overpronates, this will lead to the knee following suit and also falling in. It's worth getting a gait analysis and speaking to the professionals in a running store for some advice. I will just caveat that though with the fact it could actually be the hips causing poor knee movement and then actually looking like it's happening at the foot. Sometimes it's hard to tell which is actually the initial cause, but with that in mind, it's just a good idea to tackle all of it. I mean, who doesn't want to be stronger and more mobile? Well, that's the causes covered. It's time to move on to prevention. Taking the pressure off the patellofemoral joint through stretching is usually pretty rewarding. I find that it's effective and tends to work quite quickly, but as with any type of stretching, make sure that you only do it when you're warm and you do it correctly and you take your time on that. And one of the main areas you need to stretch are your quadriceps, and this stretch doesn't really need any reinventing. You need to find a position that you can hold, either lying or standing. I would recommend lying on your side to get the best stretch and isolate the quads. Hold your lower knee towards your chest and take your other leg by the ankle and pull that ankle towards your bottom. The idea is to keep your hips still and stretch purely the muscles down the front of your thigh and into your knee. You can opt for doing this stretch in standing. Just make sure you're balanced, you've got something to hold onto, and that your pelvis is really still and stable. Otherwise, you'll just end up tilting your pelvis as opposed to stretching the quads. So standing on one leg, get hold of the ankle with the hand on the same side, pull that ankle towards your bottom, but trying to keep both of your knees level, your pelvis level, and then the stretch is purely going to be down your quads. Alternatively, if you are comfortable doing this one, it's quite an acute stretch, you can do it kneeling down or kneeling on one knee. I would suggest putting a pillow under the back knee, and you're in a sort of semi-lunge or kneeling lunge position. Again, get hold of that back ankle and pull it towards your bottom, and you'll be stretching that back quad, but the knee will be on the pillow, so it might be a bit too intense for some people. Well, all of these stretches are focusing on the same area and doing the same thing, so it's just a matter of finding out what works best for you. And then we need to move the focus further up the leg into the hip flexors. So like it sounds, it's the muscles which actually help to flex the hip as opposed to just moving the knee. And you've got various options again for this area. You can adapt the previous stretch by stepping the front foot further forwards and widening the stance, then dropping your hip forwards. You should feel the stretch move further up the front of your leg. And moving that focus away from the front of your hip, there's a hip mobility exercise which I really like and I find helps just relieve things. So lying on your front, bend your knees so that your feet or your ankles are basically facing up to the ceiling. And then you're going to simply lower your heels and your ankles out towards the outside of either leg, so sort of opening up your hips. And then you can repeat that, keep that as more of a fluid movement as opposed to a stretch that you hold, but you might find that's quite relieving. And then we need to also take a look at the glutes, as they obviously play a big part in hip mobility. So another good stretch, lie on your back with your feet on the floor and your knees bent. Place one ankle across the opposite thigh and then pull that thigh towards you. You'll know if you've got it, as you'll certainly feel that stretch in your glutes. I've focused on those muscles, but if you know that you're prone to tight calves or hamstrings, then make sure you give those areas some attention too. Lengthening the muscles should not be done alone. Strength is equally, if not more, important, and it might not give you that immediate release you feel from stretching, but it will have a greater impact when you return to running. And glutes need to be the main emphasis for this strength work, as along with your core, having strong and actively firing glutes is going to help with that tracking of your knee or of your patellofemoral joint, and this is going to help make you a more efficient runner, as well as reducing the chance of any return of anterior knee pain. You can focus on the glutes with exercises such as hip bridge, crab walks, side lying clams, which will really help with activation and strength. I won't go into details here, as we have a video dedicated to strong glutes, but introducing more of a whole body exercises such as deadlifts and squats can also really complement your run training. All of those stretches and strengthening exercises are naturally going to have a positive effect on your running form, but you can actually look to focus on that in particular with some run drills, which will help with that running efficiency and cause better knee alignment, which will reduce the chance of any injuries, but in particular that knee pain. But I just want to finish with a disclaimer that not all knee pain, even front of knee pain, is going to be patellofemoral joint problems. And if you have been having this issue for a long time, pain in the knee for a long time, or it's so severe, please go and seek the advice from a healthcare professional. But anyway, I do hope you've watched this video purely out of interest, not because you've got a running injury at the moment, but here's to happy, pain-free running. Give us a like if you're on that page.